history of Ireland is expressed in female images. Mother Ireland, Kathleen Ní Houliháin, Dark Rosaleen, the Shan Van Vocht, or the Poor Old Woman. We explore this image of nationalism and its relevance to Irish women today. The idea of Mother Ireland goes back into Celtic mythology. In pre-Christian, pre-colonised Ireland, no king could rightfully come to power without going through a symbolic marriage with Mother Earth. This was still true when the plantation or colonisation of Ireland by England took place in Elizabethan times. Many strong female figures appeared in Irish mythology, the most famous being Queen Maeve, the warrior queen. Mother Ireland emerged as a powerful symbol of nationalism in the 18th century, and it lingers today as a social, cultural and political reality.
I think it developed really from the 18th century, which was the first century where the image of very powerful women had disappeared. Women like the mother of Red Hugh O'Donnell, or Grania O'Malley, the sea captain, or Rosa O'Doherty, the wife of Onru O'Neill, who came with them to Ireland in the 1640s. Instead, Ireland was in a dark period. The penal laws had just come over the country and had subdued the native population in all sorts of ways. And I think the image of Ireland that the poets of the 18th century developed, because it was a new facet of Mother Ireland, was one that represented, you know, the allegory of being subdued. You know, that this was the country in the shape of a woman being subdued, her rights taken from her, no face in law, and no richness of apparel. And then added to that was the idea that she was symbolic of surrender and helplessness, with just that kind of gleam of hope that she was waiting to be rescued by the prince who would come across the sea to her again. And this image was, you know, it ran through all the poetry of the 18th century that the Gaelic poets, writing in Irish, composed.
Oh, my dark Rosaleen, do not die, do not wait. The prince are on the ocean green, they march along the deep. Their wine from the royal folk upon the ocean green, and Spanish ill shall give you home, my dark Rosaleen.
The last 200 years then epitomized an image of Ireland which was female and which typified, you know, her state of abjection, either through the penal laws or through her non-political status. So that it became an image of nationalism. It became a kind of submerged image of faith in fatherland. And it typified, if you like, the Irishman's persistent image, you know, of not just the country, but by a piquant turn of events, the kind of woman he favoured.
The harp was also a national symbol, and from the 18th century, the harp and Ireland as a woman were often portrayed together. In MacLeise's painting, based on Moore's poem, The Origin of the Harp, the outline of the weeping, long-haired woman forms the shape of the instrument.
If you look at aggressive countries and imperialist countries, they tend to be male countries, you know, like the German fatherland, and America is a fatherland. People who have a long history of oppression, I think, tend to think of their community and their country in terms of a motherland. And in its own unconscious way, I think that is an acceptance of the analogy of oppression and the oppression of women in itself. So I don't think it's a bad image.
The political cartoons of the 19th century showed Britain as a dual personality, as John Bull and Britannia. This Punch cartoon shows a strong Britannia protecting a submissive Hibernia from the mad Fenian. In the Irish equivalent from the Weekly Freeman, Éireann is the dominant figure, protecting Ulster from the dragon of Orangism. Ireland was often portrayed lamenting her dead, or calling on her sons to fight for her, or exposing crimes against her people.
The sun goes down each weary day on tenement and spire round people who starve and yet will not give way. So come all ye noble Irishmen, come join with me for liberty, and we'll make one mighty army to break the bonds of slavery.
While these cartoons were being drawn in the 1880s, they also coincided with the emergence of the Ladies' Land League, the first radical organisation of women in the national struggle. When Charles Stewart Parnell and the leaders of the Land League were imprisoned, his sisters Anna and Fanny Parnell founded the Ladies' Land League. But when Parnell and the leaders were released, they disbanded the Ladies' Land League because they thought it was too radical. In the early part of this century, Countess Markievicz saw three movements in Ireland. She listed them as the national struggle, the women's movement, and the cause of labour. Women organised around these issues, but on Easter Monday, 1916, the national struggle took precedence. The Irish Volunteers and the Citizen Army occupied the GPO in Dublin and declared Ireland a republic. After 6 days of fighting, they surrendered. 16 of the leaders were executed, but the struggle for independence went on. Cumann na mBan, the women's section of the Volunteers, continued to play a vital role, as they had done in 1916.
Women were everywhere that the Volunteers took over, except Boland's Mills. De Valera didn't believe in having women with them because De Valera, of course, is his famous saying, the girls are up on a pedestal, the comely maidens of Ireland, and should be treated as such, and that a rough and tumble place like Boland's must have been was not a place for the young girls of Ireland.
And what were the feelings of the women about that?
Well, they were very, very angry because they were mobilised on Mount Street Bridge, actually, ready to take part in the Boland's Mills fight. There were quite a number in the GPO, mostly cooking and generally keeping up the men. I mean, we always, in Cumann na mBan, we were always trained in small arms and rifles, just in case we'd have to use them. First aid was our most important, I think, because we were supposed to be wherever there might be any firing to be and anybody wounded.
From quite early on, in the beginning of the 20th century, the excitement really was for women around the notion that there would, in some future time, be two things. There would be votes for women, which was the feminist cause, but also that in some way, with intuition, there would be some kind of armed resistance. And the actual reality of matching the volunteer movement in 1914 with a remarkable women's military movement that would be concerned with intelligence, with courier work, and with actually Red Cross work. Cumann na mBan coming as it did, the founding of Cumann na mBan as it happened, came to a generation of women who had been largely exposed to kind of political excitement of a rare variety, namely the Votes for Women issue, which wasn't sitting at home in one's armchair and reading books or conducting seminars. It was actually taking to the streets and breaking windows and disrupting Prime Minister's addresses at the Gaiety Theatre, you know, and for respectable middle-class women who had got their degrees, you know, this was an experience that was quite suggestive of radicalization. So Cumann na mBan, coming at the time it did, turned many women towards being in sympathy with the revolutionary movement that was going on around them, and of which really one could argue that the franchise movement was part.
But Margaret Ward, in her book, she criticises us a lot for not making more of the suffragette idea and movement. But it never occurred to us that way. We were more or less, she makes out that we were the handmaids or the nearly camp followers of the volunteers, you know. They told us to go here and we went there. There was really nothing like that. There was much more equality, if you like, between the volunteers and Cumann na mBan.
In the proclamation of 1916, which is the principle, the fundamental principle of all things that Republicans since 1916 have believed in, that is stated that the Republic guarantees civil and religious opportunities to all its children and will treat all children of the nation equally. When that is realized, without all the aggro that is around it, then the dream of the women of the suffragist movement will have been realized, but not until then.
It seems to me that there was an overlap of interest between the goals of the suffragettes, which was certainly to get representation for women in Parliament, and those of the nationalists, who would have seen that as something that women...
And in the 26 counties of the new state, opinions were split and a bloody civil war ensued. This was won by supporters of the treaty, and many of their opponents were interned.
Well, I think everyone in Cumann na mBan was in prison sometime. I was pretty often. Mountjoy, Kilmainham, and the North Dublin Union.
Were you treated as political prisoners?
Oh, we were always political. Well, when we weren't, we'd go on hunger strike until we'd get political treatment. We had to do that a few times, but they generally gave in to us after perhaps 12 or 14 days hunger strike, but we had to do that a few times.
The radicalism of the past decade, in which Irish women had been prominent, was effectively halted by the Civil War and its aftermath. Women continued to organise in the national struggle, despite the conservatism of the 1930s and 40s.
For John Cumann na mBan in 1931, there was no talk anywhere of women's issues at that time, not that we ever heard of anyway. I mean, always it was, as I've tried to explain to people, if you were in the Republican movement, you believed in equal opportunity for everybody, and that meant women as well as people of other religions or other races. You didn't think of it as a thing apart. If we gained the Republic, which we hope to gain, women's equality would, of course, be part of a socialist republic, which is what those of us, at least in Cumann na mBan, required.
Would you believe it? There's a new washing up liquid, and it's even better than Fairy. What is it? New Fairy, of course. If this is a typical day's washing up in your home, you can make New Fairy last not just one extra day, not even 3 or 4, but on average an extra 8 days. So you see, New Fairy lasts longer than ever before, 8 days longer.
So what's a little dandruff?
Okay, big brother, imagine you're at the social event of the year and your dream girl says hello, just as you do this. Her first impression, what a hunk, and only a few flakes.
Give me a break.
The breaks are you never get a second chance to make a first impression.
So?
So ordinary shampoos won't fix your problem. Try this.
Head and Shoulders. You don't have dandruff.
Ta-da!
Head and Shoulders, because you never get a second chance to make a first impression.
The power and style of the world's great cars have been captured in the Encyclopedia of Supercars. Each issue brings you stunning perspectives of acknowledged supercars, from the outside and from the inside, documenting the histories of legendary marques and the men behind them, and building a library of classics from A to Z. Part 2 features the E-Type Jaguar and comes free with Part 1, the Encyclopedia of Supercars.
I just can't believe that what you're saying is true. I'm just trying to find a way to make it clear and get through to you. I got to tell you how good it really is. Through sun and rain, some things never change. You know you can't top the taste of a twirl. Cadbury's chocolate. You can't top the taste of a twirl.
You'll be surprised at the world of holiday ideas in the Ireland Holidays 91 brochure, free from your travel agent or Board Fáilte office. A holiday break in Ireland. Isn't that music to your ears?
I've discovered a way of making a feast of my fish. Take a tasty sauce, sandwich it between prime white fish fillet and crunchy crumb, and there you have it. Bird's eye fish feasts. With cheese or garlic butter sauce.
I was interned in Ireland jail in the 40s, 1942. I was served with an internment order. I was there to 44. And then again in the 70s, 1975, I was served with a detention order. Many women done many different types of work. Some done welfare, intelligence work, writing, you know, writing articles. But some done more military type of work. All different according to their abilities. and all very necessary.
The hearth and home attitude to women was sanctified in the 1937 Constitution. This said that without the contribution of women within the home, the good of the nation could not be achieved.
They didn't sort of just retreat back into the home. It was the fact that women lost their most positive voice after the treaty. And that's how, for instance, the Constitution, the terribly anti-woman Constitution, the terrible anti-women laws were allowed to be formed and went ahead because there was no opposition to them, because all those good, sound, radical, vocal, strong women took the Republican side, and the Republican side was crushed as much as they possibly could. But then it was men as well. But also I think too that after a period of turmoil and crisis, that people do want to get back to some sort of what they say, I suppose, is normality.
The position of women in the Irish Constitution is value-laden. I think it really comes from the central position that the Catholic Church occupies in the Irish Free State, and the perception of women, you know, in Catholic cultural and political life. And this very often happens in a country that has undergone a revolution followed by a civil war, that the strong currents of regulating the life of the country go towards a desire for conservative behaviour and conservative images of women.
The Virgin Mary is a very, very strong image in Ireland. All the little grottos, you know, and is Our Lady in those grottos, and people build them for you'll see them in new housing estates, say council housing estates. They will build their little grotto, and even on the side of the road when you drive down the country, you'll see a little grotto to Our Lady. But there has been apparitions of Our Lady in Ireland. People have claimed to have seen Our Lady, so they build these things to Our Lady.
Mary, the mother of Jesus, has undoubtedly, since the famine, become the most effective role model for Irish women, only recently beginning to lose its hold. There isn't any strong evidence, you know, that it was a role model before the Great Famine of 1846, but after the famine of 1846, the whole faith world of people on this island really changed, because they had never experienced a punishing God before that. And after the famine, a kind of a somber element comes into the practice of the faith. So Mary, Mother of Jesus, comes up as the sorrowful mother, you know, the role model for the Irish mother who lost her sons in famine, in war, and particularly to a cause like the nationalist cause.
I feel strongly that the church does like the image of mother as the home of a woman, as the homemaker, as a passive, as a subservient person. She is always in my remembrance of being taught religion in school, was like that this was the woman's place. It was her. In fact, I remember distinctly being told that you should have as much children as you can in order to provide the church with more followers. Like, I remember that so well. Do you remember that? Like, we were told things like that in school. In my opinion, the church, until the church will accept women in as priests and give them an equal opportunity, I don't think it is accepting of women. I think it is disregarding women as equal, intelligent human beings.
I was taught exclusively by nuns in the city, and I went on to, from primary education to the grammar school, where we were educated and trained to be young ladies. Our future would be either as spinster teacher, spinster social worker, or if we were really lucky to be a married woman. Politics never came into it. Women were not meant to have any part in the destiny of the city. Politics and the whole Mother Ireland stuff was reserved for the boys up at the college. The fact about the current modern Irish woman is she is on the pill. She is sexually free. She is demanding work outside the home. She is controlling the number and spacing of her children within marriage. She is walking away from a marriage when it is bad. She doesn't even necessarily consider marriage a condition of motherhood. There's been a massive sea change in the social attitudes and perceptions of Irish women since 1970. Absolutely massive. It is not reflected in the official literature or the official laws. The men are still, who still control us, the holy men and the political men, are trying desperately to keep the other image alive, that of the Rose of Tralee, Irish Colleen, Virgin Mary image. But the reality, as we all know, is completely different.
I left the girls behind me. They were so tall and free. But of all the girls throughout this world, give an Irish girl to me.
From the 1940s through to the 60s, Ireland concentrated on getting the state's economy in order. The image of the Irish Colleen was now used to attract new invaders in the form of tourists and multinational companies.
I was very pleased that it was a natural photo of an Irish mother. I've been portrayed as myself, so if people see it as a Colleen, maybe they do, I don't know, but I feel that it's just a very normal photo of me, as I would be any day of the week. I have worked on the bog before, but my main work now is gardening. We grow all our own vegetables, and I do get turf in, but I buy it from somebody else that has got it. But you know, if it's a realistic view, whether it's cutting turf or digging in your garden, that is my type of life.
Like most of the people around here would go to the Bogs family unit with their children. There's an awful lot left out that isn't in the photographs, I suppose. They are romanticised, I suppose. Like we're all happy in them. But the reality of that type of life is not so romantic when you go to the bog week in, week out, and the turf is still wet and you don't get it off, or your hay is going mouldy because you didn't get it off the ground in time. The magazine is to sell Ireland, and it is an image of Ireland, of family life, which I think is always been thought of as an essential, the backbone of Ireland. And in Ireland, they still believe in that image, they still fight for that. I mean, any arguments against any issues that come up, and like divorce or contraception or whatever, they always bring up this thing of the family. This will destroy the family, regardless as whether that exists in reality or not. So it is a packaged image.
The whole Rosaleen or Mother Ireland image is a very difficult one to maintain. For example, once the Free State, 26 counties, got their independence, they said the country was, they had achieved victory, and there's no need anymore to mention Rosaleen sighing, moaning and weeping. And indeed to refer to her at all would be to remind themselves that in fact the job wasn't finished yet, that part of the country was still occupied by British troops, so they very quickly stopped all references to Rosaleen as such. It reflected badly upon their virility. And then they came up with another new name. Around 1969, when the trouble started all over again, they referred to Ireland as the old woman, 4 green fields, an old woman whose land had been taken from her for one of her 4 green fields, and whose many sons were meant to go out and try and retrieve this forest green field about her.
I had 4 green fields, each one was a jewel, but strangers came and tried to take them from me. I had 5 strong sons. They fought to save my jewels. They fought and they died, and that was my grief, said she.
By 1968, discrimination, unemployment, bad housing, and the enduring national question led to the creation of a non-violent civil rights movement in the north. The unionist government in Belfast reacted violently to this new expression of popular dissent. By mid-69, Catholics in working-class ghettos virtually declared their communities to be no-go areas. In August 69, Derry's Bogside erupted and rioting broke out across the north. The conflict is still going on, but for Irish women, the issues of the early part of the century are still the issues of today.
I see the boys in blue, the specials too. I see them coming for me and for you. And I say to myself, what a wonderful world. I build the barricades and help men fight all through the day, aye, and all bloody night. Yet I say to myself, what a wonderful world.
I don't know of a mother in a working class situation or a mother in our situation in Ireland for whom every day is not a fight. Being a mother is certainly not a passive romantic image. Women's lives are traditionally all about getting on with it and making do, and therefore their collective experience is much better in social crisis.
What we want a country with full employment. What we want a country with decent houses. And nobody can give it to us. Nobody can give the working class their political, their social, their economic freedom. But the working class themselves. And we've waited long enough. Now we'll take it for ourselves. Thank you.
Well, in '69, women were not in any major way independently organised. Therefore, we were all in there together, women and men, doing whatever was being done. There were certainly tensions, and realistically, the whole free Derry experience, Derry wasn't that free this side of the wall either. All the internal contradictions that went on before the barricades went up, went on afterwards. Women in Derry were still producing 3 square meals a day, and men in Derry were still eating them. And the women were still washing the dishes, and the men were still holding up the corner of the bookies wall there. And when the excitement started, everybody was in it together. And when the decisions were being taken, the women who were on whatever committees were there, but most of the decisions would still have been taken by men.
17 of us had formed a committee called the Movement for the Liberation of Irish Women. And at our very first meeting, we agreed straight away that we would not mention the North. We would not take up a position in the national question because it would split us. Someone like me from the North, there was a couple of us Northerners on, I might ask them to get involved in things that would divert their energy, and I agreed. At the time, I thought it was more important to raise the consciousness of women in the South and to concentrate on that. However, after 17 years and after having achieved many victories, for example, now we can get big victory, we can get the pill, and we have equal pay. And some of the more gross inequities have been removed. It is, I think, now time to turn our minds to the national question. It is a running wound in the body politic of Ireland, and women have to decide what to do. But I think we have the difficulties here that women have, feminists have throughout the world. No great text has been written on the position of feminism and physical force. We don't know. I don't think it is an inherent part of feminism that a person should be pacifist. We just haven't thrashed it out. It's been debated day by day, issue by issue around the world, and the further away the women are here struggling, the easier it is to support them. Irish women, for example, have no trouble supporting Winnie Mandela and the ANC, or the guerrilla woman of the Philippines, or the woman of Nicaragua. But when it comes to the use of physical force to achieve an objective here at home, they are confused, and I don't expect Irish women, especially feminists, who've only been in operation for the last 17 years, to be any less ambivalent or any clearer-minded than the majority of Irish constitutional nationalists, as they are called. They also don't know, can't make up their minds.
Women in the women's movement in the 1970s are women who are prepared to move out into ecology and take on, issues around the environment, or they will move into the peace movement and take on an issue like the nuclear threat, or they will, be much more strident in the trade union movement or in politics. I do see a continuing tension that exists between, the aims or the goals of feminism and the aims and goals of a national struggle. And there is no easy resolution of our reconciliation of the two sets of goals.
If you look at young women today, I still think that the best of the feminist movement, the best young feminist women today are those who have come through the experience of the Republican movement, those who have come to an awareness of their oppression as women through a growing awareness of all other layers of oppression.
We have decided to protest against internment, and despite the ban on parades, we have decided that we will parade tomorrow through the streets of Derry.
Living in Belfast was a political education in itself. My own family have a Republican background, but living on the Falls Road, I saw internment, I saw the British soldiers, and that in itself was, I just got a political education from looking around me, and at that time, women were involved. I was very young when I became involved in the Republican movement. At that time, we were protesting about internment, and we're on the streets, actually, and when the bits came into the area, you were always out banging bindage, all that crack. And myself, we became aware, right, I have to do something here, this just isn't right. You find yourself, you become more and more involved in that. There was a military campaign, women were involved in that, and I became involved then. In 1976, I was arrested and charged with causing 3 explosions and possession of 2 firearms. And I was also charged with membership of the Irish Republican Army, which I got 14 years imprisonment and served 10.5 years altogether. I would say the Republican movement itself, while it treated us as equals, certain sense, we were in prison, that at the same time they didn't feel that not even them, you know, people on the outside in general. Society looked on us as the girls in Armagh, and we shouldn't really be in there. We should be out here and let the men do it, you know. The men are quite capable of doing it, and they don't need women to do it. Women aren't supposed to be politically active. We're supposed to be looked after or taken care of, and not, definitely not participating in a no-wise protest, never mind being in prison. We even thought in the early days that we were an extension. We were always, we were doing this to support the men in the blocks, but at the same time, we were on it for political status, and we wanted political status as much as the men in the blocks. But I would say ourselves, at the beginning, didn't have a good, positive attitude. Well, we were educating ourselves in there, and through events, we became more aware of ourselves as women. So the movement developed, and has developed over the years as regards the women prisoners, and we developed ourselves in there. It was an education on both, for both, I think.
There's a great need for a women's movement to fight for the rights of women now today, to try to redress some of the oppression, the misery, the poverty of a huge mass of women in this country. And I think that is best done through a separate women's organisation. And I very much support that, and admire the things that they have achieved in Ireland up to now. But I still think that what can be achieved by a women's movement in a society that isn't free is limited. I do think that there can't be, you know, the old slogan, there can't be true women's liberation without national liberation, because there can be no such thing as freedom for a section of society, while the society that they're living in is one of is an oppressive society.
Until Ireland is free and controls its own destiny, and it's not as it is at the moment, controlled by remote control by the British and by foreign multinationals, of course there can't be true liberation. That doesn't mean in the meantime we sit back and do nothing. As James Connolly said, Ireland without our people means nothing to me. I cannot, certainly not on the evidence, I'm not going to wait until Ireland is united in order to get me rights, as though the men are going to turn around and hand them to me. They haven't been seen as being very benevolent in the run-up to this great and glorious day. But in any case, the liberation must continue on all fronts.
Supposing the women's movement in the South got strong enough to gain all the things that women are supposed to, like equal pay, creche facilities, contraception, abortion rights, things like that, but that the situation in the North would still go on, you know, so that there would be a kind of lip service to feminism paid in the South. And I could see a situation as well where there might well be a 32-county republic, but that the situation for women would just be as awful as it has always been. So, like, really, what I think is that feminism and republicanism actually monitor each other in a way that I think republicanism to a certain extent used to be perceived as a reactionary, nationalistic kind of movement, but that it is like more and more women and more people going into that who want to expand that so that it includes rights for everybody, so it isn't like paying lip service to a Mother Ireland. Like, I really think it's the women in the Republican movement who are doing a lot to change around the image of Mother Ireland, like really to get rid of what it used to mean. There's this woman who is totally unknown, who had this huge part to play in Robert Emmet's rebellion, but that in most like modern revolutionary terms isn't seen as a big part, because although she helped set it up and she suffered a great deal afterwards, she wasn't there at the time. Anne Devlin was for Irish women. Anne Devlin was about reclaiming that past and saying, look, we had this history, and it isn't just the sort of larger figures who... You see, one of the problems is in Irish history is that the larger figures, like the Constance Markievicz, she's presented in the history books as a unique figure. And of course she was, but she's made to seem out of the ordinary, and therefore there was no one else doing any work like that. And like Anne Devlin, again I'm repeating myself, but Anne Devlin is about saying like this is work that goes on all the time, that women do, and that there aren't just these one or two figures. There are many, many women to identify with, or to question, or to look at, or to say that you're part of them.
And there are enough to swear against me. Don't leave your blood on my conscience.
And not swear one word against you. It's not for you who did it.
Nearly every culture has an Anne Devlin story. You know, the Anne Devlin story of women, women's political beliefs and political work being devalued.
If you sigh, we hear you. If you weep, we weep. In your hours of gladness, how our pulses leap. Ireland, Mother Ireland, let what may befall, ever shall we hold you, dearest, best of all.
It became a standard joke in there, you know, this mother image. You know, we would slag about it, and we would say our joke was, Mother Ireland, get off our back, you know, because we just couldn't. It didn't reflect what we believed in, and it just doesn't reflect Ireland, you know. Maybe at one time people could relate to it, but today, you know, we've moved away from that, and we're not going to go backwards, we're moving onwards.
Like, for me, Mother Ireland is not, in the end, a positive image. Like, the associations I have with it are not positive ones. I actually think it's a wrong thing to do, to call a country after a woman, because it gets into those kind of areas where a country is to be won or penetrated or ploughed, or like men are going in there being pioneers. And there's this weird psychological thing that happens where the country is a woman, and you talk about the rape of a country and the rape of a woman, and it means that women aren't seen for themselves, like they're absolved into this overall mythology, which I don't think is a progressive one.
If I had to pick an image, a female image of Ireland, I would pick the image of Sheila na Gig. Sheila na Gig is a fertility symbol, a sculpted naked woman who is to be found still on the walls of the castles and ruined churches around Ireland. She grossly exaggerated figure of a rather cute wee woman with big breasts who keeps her legs apart. She's totally naked. I don't want her in the museum. I want her out there on the walls where she is. I make a point in every county in Ireland, no matter where I go, I find Sheila on the wall. It's like one day, Chucky Arla, in feminist terms.
Most people do think of Ireland as a woman, and in particular as a mother. I mean, I think it is a good image. That, you know, the image of the mother, you know, mother nurturing, protecting, comforting. It's only when that image is distorted that it's a bad image. When Ireland is portrayed as a woman who's clinging, dependent, saying, you know, the old sending her sons out to fight for her. That's when I don't like it. I mean, now I think the image is much more of, particularly in Republican women's minds, the image is positive. That it's not just calling on her sons to fight; it's the woman herself fighting. You know, Ireland as a woman, standing up and fighting for herself.
I just grew up very conscious of Mother Ireland before I was aware of a social, political and economic system that went with it. And I would still hold very strongly to it for all her strengths and weaknesses and contradictions and areas of reaction and all the problems she has caused me. I would still very much see myself as a child of Mother Ireland. It's not a case that, as I say, after the revolution, suddenly people will, like some road to Damascus, suddenly see what is good, and women will have their rights. They won't have them. Won't have them unless they organise and fight for them. But then neither will workers, which would include both women and men. Neither will children, neither will have single parents, neither will peasants or farmers, or nobody will ever, and that's just my basic philosophy in life, nobody will ever have anything unless they get up and organise themselves to fight for it, and if necessary, take it.